Hi, my name is Jason Yunker. I'm the director of Resilient Recovery Ministries, and I'm here today to do a reaction video on a TED Talk called Everything You Thought You Knew About Addiction Is Wrong.
I got Jesus in my mind. In this world
I believe this guy's name is Johann Hari, and I'll be evaluating these claims. Is what he's saying correct? Or are some of the things that he's saying maybe not so correct? I don't like to give a long introduction, so let's just go ahead and look at this video.
One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including later cocaine addiction. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it's now exactly 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world.
Okay, so I can kind of see where he's going here already. It's been 100 years since we banned drugs and imposed that on the rest of the world. I think he's going to be making an argument that drugs are not about a moral deficit that someone has. It's not about a moral failing. Yeah, there's definitely some problems with using that approach alone. However, I will say that when people experience consequences of their use that include legal consequences, that's considered recovery capital, and it can actually motivate people to begin to get off drugs and alcohol. But let's see what he has to say.
And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new evidence about addiction, I think we're going to have to change a lot more than our drug policies. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks, you'd start to physically need them, and at the end of those 20 days, you'd all be heroin addicts, right? That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact something not right with this story is when it was explained to me, if I step out of this TED Talk today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given loads of diamorphine.
Okay, so I would give this a C+. That is true. People do go to the hospital, they do receive medication for pain, and they don't become addicted. However, we are in the middle of an opioid crisis in this country because people were overprescribed those drugs. And the manufacturers of those drugs lied and said that some of them were not addictive. And there certainly are a certain number of people who, given opiates, will become addicted. And the longer you give the opiates, the more likely they are to become addicted. Yeah, I have to give that a C. Let's see what his next point is here.
You get a rat and you put it in a cage and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose.
Okay, so that is a very interesting study. I think that study does a great job of poking a hole in that kind of unitary belief that it's just a medical problem, it's only a brain disease, it's chronic and it's relapsing. It does a great job of poking a hole in that, for sure. It is a study with rats, not human beings, and there's a lot of differences between rats and human beings that would make it necessary to do way more than this one study to conclusively prove that it has the environment has such a huge influence on whether or not people become addicted. So let's see what he has to say next.
But fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study, and what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped.
So that's partially true. I've read that study. There were people in the study who did go to rehab. Interestingly, they fared much worse than the people who didn't get treatment. But there was a group that got treatment. The other thing that's not entirely true there is that he said they didn't go through withdrawal. They absolutely did. The authors of this study knew that their results were really were going to be controversial and kind of shocking, and they anticipated some of the objections that people would have. One of those objections was, well, they used over there, but they probably weren't really addicts. So that's why when they came back to the US, they didn't continue to use, so your studies, doesn't really show anything. These folks were addicted and they went through withdrawal. Now, did a huge percent, like massive percentage of them not use once they got to the US? That's absolutely true. All right, I think that is about all we can tackle in one video. So I'm going to cut this reaction video in two. In the next section, he starts to talk about some of his proposed solutions, and he makes a really big claim about the connection between social connection, we could say, or social support, and using that I think is interesting because it's both very true and pretty exaggerated at the same time. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the rest of this video, go ahead and check out video number 2. In the meantime, please click subscribe and click the notification bell so that you get notified when new items come up. By clicking subscribe, you make sure other people can see these videos. Thank you.